So, okay, welcome. We've got Brenda, we've got Michelle, and anyone else who joins us. Hello. Thanks for joining us for the first of 4 calls for this series of the keys to self-discovery. If anyone doesn't really know who I am or what I do, I am focusing mainly on our next steps in evolutionary growth for humanity. As we know, the earth is changing really quickly and we're kind of not really knowing how to deal with it. So, oh, Michelle, so good to see you. You will get a chance to talk later on. So, yeah, so anyone who joins live, if you want to, everyone's muted, so if you want to pop on the side, any comments or questions or anything as I'm going along, I will try and go fairly slowly because this content's so good that I tend to go quite quickly and I don't want you to miss anything. So I want you just to get a pen and paper and just really kind of tune into the content that I'm going to be sharing. And then at the end, what we will do is we will use you guys as guinea pigs to show you how all this stuff works. Hi, Natasha. Thanks for joining us live. Nice to see you guys. Okay, so grab pen and paper. Any comments, put off to the right-hand side there. It's right-hand side on my side. And anyone who listens to the recordings, you can also comment below, and I will comment on your comment. And pretty much just tune into what you need to know and take any questions or comments that you need to ask, and we'll actually open up the call at the end for you guys to have a bit of a chat with me, and we'll use these as an example. So keys to self-discovery, really this starts with my own journey, because as we know, we all use ourselves as our own guinea pigs to learn about life and what's actually going on. So I remember a couple of years ago, I wanted to be more spiritual. Whoever wants to, ever thinks that? I want to be more spiritual. How can I just go really deeper into being more spiritual? And as I asked that question, the universe said back to me, it's all about consciousness. And I'm like, that's actually pretty cool, because consciousness I knew was within me, so then I had control over that. So I got pretty excited about the fact that consciousness was our next steps in being more spiritual. So what then happened is I knew that consciousness wasn't just the mind, because I've read a lot of near-death experience stories. I've got friends who have had near-death experiences. I've done a lot of astral traveling and meditating and interdimensional traveling, that I just knew that the consciousness that we have here is very different to the consciousness that we have on the other side, if you want to call it that. So I kind of knew that consciousness wasn't the mind, because we know, or we have an awareness of something else when we're not in this body. So that's where I kind of thought, well, that does actually make sense, that that's our next steps in spiritual work, because if we're going deeper into consciousness, and that's taking us further in this human evolutionary status, then that means that we're going to learn more about who we are in this universe. And so again, that was very exciting for me. So for a year, I played with varying consciousness. So I started doing work with people in this life, in past lives, in utero, in between lives. And I knew that we had different levels of consciousness all happening at the one time. So you've got your human consciousness, which is what we know right now. Then you've got your soul consciousness, which is about our journey and incarnations. And then you've got your super consciousness, which is the knowing of the universe and what is actually true about that. So I knew the difference from years of meditating and, of course, all that different traveling between the two consciousness. And I found that when we drop into our body, our consciousness shifts from this big expansive everything and pure love and everything else into joy, from joy into worry, stress, fear and anxiety. And I remember I had an experience where I was kind of doing all my traveling, and I just, you feel that beautiful space of, everything's bliss and beautiful and wonderful. And I remember I started to drop into this body in that space, and my body started to freak out. And I was like, whoa, that's actually really interesting. Again, I always kind of say to everyone, like, start to see things as interesting, because then it opens you up to learn a lot more about it. So, but that was really interesting. And as I looked at it, I realized that in our human bodies, we have one preposition of fear, which is survival. So if we don't have fear or worry or concerns or anything like that, our way of being in this human body is that we can't survive. So we have to acknowledge, I think the first step in this shift in consciousness is actually realizing that we are constantly in survival. Now, if you then are aware that you're constantly in survival, what that means that you actually have to look at your thoughts and the way that you're behaving and everything else from that place of survival and being the observer of that. So all these worries, fears, anxieties, stress, they're here to help us to survive. And then when we don't have them, we think something's wrong. So you know how sometimes you're kind of in a really good place and you go, oh, there must be something I need to worry about. It's because you actually, your body and your mind actually thinks it needs something wrong to be able to survive. Now, I know that sounds crazy, but it's actually true. When you experience the difference between the two, that is exactly what it thinks that its purpose is for us to be totally in survival. So what I did, I actually watched a documentary the other day about it was like the animals in a rainforest, and they were all kind of, you know, running around doing their things. And I noticed when I was watching that video that the animals they are actually constantly in survival. They're out there to find food. They're out there to make sure they don't get killed, and they can't kind of relax. They work in that kind of pack mentality to make sure they're okay. And I watched that, and I went, oh my God, as humans, we are still living that way. We still need acceptance and approval to make sure that we'll be okay. We're still, you know, thinking that we've got to make money to put food on the table to make sure we're okay, that we've got a roof overhead. The thing is that what we actually don't realize is that we already have most of those things. So why are we worrying? Like, you've got to ask yourself that question, why are we worrying? It's an instinct that we all have, and this instinct is there to keep us protected from anything that's going on out there, so that we're actually safe in this environment. But we're shifting from being in survival into moving into another era and another element of being a human, which is growth and expansion. So I remember I read, well, I'd done a lot of years of meditation and astral traveling and interdimensional travel and things like that, and having that experience of what it's like being in a consciousness which isn't in this body, which is, again, as I said, freeing, it's expansive, it's bliss on the other side. And then I read, and if you haven't read this book, put this on your book reading list. I read a book by a lady called Anita Moorjani. It's Moorjani. Anita Moorjani wrote a book called Dying to Be Me. Now, I'm not going to give too much away about the book. I'll let you read it. But pretty much she had cancer and she died, had a near-death experience, and then from her near-death experience realized who she was, who we all are, the whole picture of what this whole purpose is of being on a planet is all about. And she also knew that when she came back that she would be completely healed. Plus, she also had a message from her father, who was over there, that to live life fearlessly. And so she didn't really want to come back because she was actually loving it so much over there. But he said, you've got a choice. You can stay up here and float around with us, or you can go back and live life fearlessly. She came back, and within 3 days after being fully riddled with cancer, her whole body, in 3 days it was all gone. And she also didn't worry too much about, you know, all the chemo they were giving her or anything like that, because she just knew nothing actually affected her state of being which then allowed her to be completely healed. So it's really interesting. Before I read that book, I had the awareness that we could be healed through consciousness. And then reading her book, this is a real life person, and please Google her and read her book or whatever, because this is a real life person who has gone in 3 days. 3 days from being dead from cancer to actually being completely healed from it. And that shows me that our bodies are amazing when we shift consciousness. So again, that went in alignment with what the universe told me, which was saying that when we shift, like that shifting consciousness is our next step of evolution, that's where we're meant to be going. And we could be a, I don't know, group of people on the planet that can be instantly healing, that can be living from a place of no fear and just growth and expansion. So with those awarenesses, you know, that Anita had, and plus the knowing of what life was all about, she just also had that essence of knowing that we were all one, and that universal body of energy that never actually dies but just transmutes and changes. So growth and expansion, or shrinking and contracting, is actually part of being a human in this experience. So what happens is that you can see that with growth and expansion, that's really where we're moving towards, and we need to be aware of the thoughts that we have around growth and expansion, or the other thoughts which are shrinking and contracting. So I'm actually now studying work with epigenetics, which is also very similar to, and it's funny because whenever I read something or learn something new, it's actually confirming the messages that I got before, which again is really cool. So I've always been getting the messages through doing this keys work that we are shifting from a humanity that is going from survival into growth and expansion. And that's exactly what epigenetics is all about, is it explains how cells behave when they're in survival, and then also how cells behave when they're in growth and expansion. So it's very interesting how they're all becoming aligned with this spiritual journey that we're having of being more spiritual and actually being able to move into our next evolutionary state, if you want to call it that. So that pretty much explains, you know, why we're here and why we're actually in this incarnation, is learning to know who we really are. And this is why this is called the keys to self-discovery, is that, you know, who are we? Why are we really here? What are we doing? And so we know all the elements that are, you know, involved in life and what's incorporated in human life, and to change what's going on and move from survival into growth and expansion, we need to look at the experiences that we're having. And so a couple of years ago, I started to do some, and a couple of people here have actually played around with this with me, where we did resets. So I wanted to look at how we could change our current lives based around, you know, traumas that we've had in the past, and how we heal the traumas in the past to be able to be like changing our lives right now. And what actually happened, I actually thought that all the traumas that existed right now were all from our childhood. And so I thought, let's go back to our childhood and let's go back and find out where all these traumas have come from. But what I was shown constantly, time and time again, was that we were going back into utero, which actually says that when a baby is in a mother's stomach, it already has an idea about itself, about the world, and around people around it. It can hear things, it can feel things. And so this showed me, and it was really high percentage of people who were being born with these preconceived ideas about itself and the world. So what I was shown is that we are actually born with what you might call a tunnel vision of a perception of what our life is going to be like even before we're born. So we're kind of on the back foot already when we're born, because we're not born with this big expansive idea of the world. We're actually born with a specific perception around what life is going to be like. We pick a lot of it up from our, you know, the energy from the parents and what the parents are saying. And again, it's all perception. So we all have a perception around like a parent might be saying something to a child even in utero, and the child can still perceive it as different to how the actual parent is saying it. So it's not like I have a lot of parents saying, well, how do I know how to bring up a child without any baggage? It's like, well, you can't, because you can have, 5, 10, 20 children born in the same family. They will all have a preconceived idea about what their upbringing is like. So it was very interesting that when I did all these case studies about going back into where trauma comes from, it's actually coming from what I call an incarnation blueprint, which is a blueprint that shows us what our life is going to be like already before we're born, and and that's all based around how we see the world, which is a perception. So let's look at all of this that we're looking at all of it's like a preconceived idea of what we'll experience. And it's almost like that chicken and the egg idea, is that when it's not that when we are born perfect and we then create the experiences that create the beliefs. We're actually born with the beliefs that create the experiences, because the way we see things is the way that they are to us. So what we're coming through in is, again, this tunnel vision that says this is how life is, and we don't really know any different. And this is why in the world we have so many people who are fighting or arguing or just can't get along, because everyone sees things differently. And you've got to wonder where that comes from. It's because we are all born with an incarnation blueprint, which tells us what our perceptions are going to be like when we're born. So I hope that makes sense as to why we all think differently, why we all have different experiences, and why you can have a handful of people having the same experience, but they'll all see it completely different ways. So I've got people saying to me, well, how do I even know what's on what my perceptions are, what I'm born with? If I want to expand from this tunnel vision and this one consciousness of this, how do I get from this to this? And it's very, very easy, is to look at your thoughts and your feelings. So we're going to start looking at thoughts and feelings, because they're the keys to what your incarnation blueprint is. Because again, how do you know what your incarnation blueprint is when you don't know any different to what you already have? You just don't. And I have to say, it's really interesting when you bring into conversations with other people the awareness that everyone thinks differently and everyone has different perceptions. So you can actually have conversations with people around how they see things. And it's really interesting when you bring up scenarios and you bring that up in a conversation, that everyone can appreciate that everyone sees things in different ways, and then everyone lets go of judgment, everyone lets go of, anything to do with making people right or wrong or anything like that. And they just move into love and acceptance that everyone just sees things as different. It's actually quite crazy. And if you can carry that also through your life and just make that your new perception, that not everyone sees everything the same way that I see things. So let's start with your thoughts and the feelings. So we all know our thoughts and our feelings. Well, I know that so who knew that our thoughts and our feelings are the insight to the blueprint to what we're born with, but they're also the key, and I'm going to show you the key to also connecting you to your soul consciousness. So that's another advantage to our thoughts and our feelings. It's a bit sad that our thoughts and feelings have had a bit of a, I don't know, what do you want to call it, bad rap lately. And people don't really know what to do with their thoughts and their feelings these days. So I'm going to teach you guys what you guys can do to not only get them to connect you to your incarnation blueprint, but also how they can actually connect you to your soul voice, which is, again, that deeper truth as to why you're here and what you're doing here. So I'm just going to turn my page. So we're also born as part of this incarnation blueprint. Most of us, if not all of us, are born with the awareness that this is the only life. Who gets that? This is the only life. Again, you can see the reason why we're born with the fact that this is the only life is that's also part of survival. We need to fight to survive because this is the only life. So can you see, even with that philosophy, we will continue to be in survival? Really. So that's one of the things. And I'm not a person to put my beliefs on anyone else. Again, everyone has their own perceptions and beliefs. And I can plant a seed, but at the end of the day, I actually honor everyone's beliefs and perceptions because, of course, that creates their experiences. So if you believe and know that this life is the only life that there is, and don't have an experience of anything else, I mean, I've only know the difference because I've experienced it. And it's really hard to say to someone, there is something more than this if they haven't experienced it. So you've got to be a little bit kind to yourself when you're shifting perceptions and truths and all that sort of thing. If you're learning new ways of being and new thought processes, the best way to look at it is to go into your gut feeling. Again, your feeling will tell you what kind of feels expansive or what feels like I'm in survival. Now, you can instantly see that when we look at life from a place of this is the only life that I have, that feels contracting. It feels, again, kind of like this is all I've got to do and I'm going to just like make sure I get it done. And that's also why we are given that amnesia before we come down here, to make sure that we get everything done that we want to do in this life. But from experience, is it working? I'm sorry, but it's just not working because people are kind of like, that's too big for me to that concept's too big for me, that this is the only life that I've got to do. So I'm just going to sit back and watch because it's too scary. So the things that we're being born with, these concepts and beliefs that we've just been born with, they're actually just holding us back and keeping us in these small little pockets of perception. So it's actually really cool to play around with. Okay, so if I'm saying to you that there is more than this life and your soul is going to experience more than this life, how does that feel? Does that feel expansive and good? Or if it doesn't, you can go back to the perception that this is the only life that we have. But I can guarantee you, whatever your perception will be what is true for you. So this is where it doesn't actually matter what anyone thinks or believes, because it's their life. Like, it's their life, their perception, and that's how their life is going to be. And we all have choices as to how that's going to look. So that's just one scenario of how we can look at the difference between what is true and what we want to make true and what our perceptions are based around how we feel and where we want them to be. If you start to move your perception from being in that feeling of survival and struggle and worry and stress and everything else, and move into, does this feel expansive? Then you'll kind of know which one is your true truth, your main truth, just through the feelings. So, and I just want to also just really highlight the awareness. Someone must have shifted something because I just burped. Again. So this must be good for someone. So I really want to highlight too that what you believe or perceive will be true. And I just want you to really soak that in. Whatever you believe or perceive will be true. So you need to actually start to look at what you think is true to even get started on knowing what your incarnation blueprint is. So using your thoughts and feelings, they will actually show you what is true, and then you can use them to show you what your experiences are going to be. And this is, again, helping you to identify what you actually think. So let me now go into thoughts. So if we want to change this, if we're kind of feeling stuck or small, or we want to feel expansive and have the experience of doing that, it does take a shift in consciousness. And the way that we shift consciousness is through thoughts and feelings. So if we want to do that, you need to be aware of what your thoughts are. I'm going to start with thoughts. So over a year ago, I started studying, because I've got a book club that I run, and we studied A New Earth by Eckhart Tolle. And it was amazing because what I learned from his work is that the thing that he talks about is that thoughts are happening, they're just happening to you. They're actually not who you are. So when he said thoughts are just happening, I was like, oh my God, that actually, again, that actually feels really true, that thoughts are just happening. They are not who we are. And what I did then is I did 6 months of just being in awareness of thoughts happening. And again, with what I want you guys to do this week is maybe today, just start to be aware of your thoughts happening. As you can see, as soon as you're aware of your thoughts happening, you then go from, oh my God, I'm hopeless, or I'm stupid, or whatever, into, oh, that's a thought, that's just happening. Instantly, you've got a bit of space then to see it for what it is, which is a thought that's happening. Now, what I've found by looking at thoughts happening, there is another voice that comes through when you're watching the thought happening, which is actually your soul voice, which tells you what is true. And then what happens when you're watching the thought happening and your soul voice is telling you what is true, it actually makes the thought that's happening look ridiculous. So if you've got a thought or a belief or a perception that you're not enough or anything like that, which most of us have, because we need to have that to then survive on a planet. If we just look at that thought of you're not enough, and then your soul voice goes, well, how could you not be enough in this moment? You're just here. Like, that's what your soul will say. But then what I'll call, well, I'll tell you what it's called in a minute. The other voice will say you're not enough, but your soul will go, well, how can you be more than what you are right now? That's what your soul will say. How can you be more than what you are right now? And then it looks at I'm not enough and goes, well, that's just not true. So I did that for 6 months, and that was really, really interesting. And what I learned is when you have that soul voice come through, it actually bypasses the other one. And what I found is that the other one doesn't actually exist anymore, because you can't, what consciousness is, it's all about knowing. So it's actually when you know something different about yourself and about everything else, and shift that perception around what you know, that then becomes a new consciousness. And you start to move away from being in survival into growth and expansion. So the thing is that, we've got lots of influences that we've had in our lives. We've had lots of things come up in our lives. So we've just got to identify. And if you want to know where you want to start, and we'll do a little bit of an example today, is start looking at your thoughts and start actually observing them and recognizing the thought as just the thought happening. And then you'll get the space that you need to then shift you into your next level of consciousness. Now, let me just say, if you don't get your soul voice coming through when you get to observe your own thought, that's actually okay too, because if it's quiet, then that's where we want to be. It's called, again, a reset of your perceptions and beliefs. So if you've got nothing, that's actually really good, because the brain is so used to creating a story to make it something that if you're going to nothing, then it's stopped doing that and stopped putting you in survival mode. Does that make sense? Cool. So what I want to do is I want to share with you a little bit more around what those thoughts are, and why they're there and where they come from. So along the journey of identifying thoughts, Eckhart Tolle actually talks about the ego and its effect on our day-to-day life. So what I was noticing as I was noticing the thoughts and then noticing that it was called the ego, and I didn't know much about the ego, I was noticing the thoughts and then noticing that they were from the ego. And then I got a message again from the universe saying most thoughts are from the ego. And I'm like, are you serious? Like, is that true? So again, did lots more study on that, myself as a case study first off, and then using other people. So I wanted to know more about the ego and why it gives us all these negative, horrible thoughts, which actually aren't even true. And what I was shown is that it's the ego's job to make sure that we are safe and protected. But in this fast-paced world, the ego can't differentiate between, again, what you're seeing is true and what you think is true. So say, for example, the ego jumps up and says, watch out, you're going to be eaten by a lion. Well, you might just carry that thought with you and be scared of everything from a movie that you watched or something that the media said or whatever. And we carry all of these external thoughts and beliefs from everywhere else, making the ego stronger for it to use all of this stuff to protect you more. Again, as we know, is that working? And it's always my comment, is this working? If I don't think and I don't feel like it's working, I go, there must be another way. So the ego will keep creating all these stories in our heads. Like who understands that? All the thoughts, all the stories, and it can be very sneaky. I have literally pages and pages and pages of notes, which I'm not going to bore you with in this call, of all the ways the ego shows up, and it is scary in all the different instances. It's between 75 to 99% of your thoughts. If not, if you are also in highly fight or flight most of the time, I would probably say 100% of the time, you are in survival mode, which is where a lot of people are these days. So our system, like our body is directly influenced by the ego through fight or flight and that parasympathetic system. So whatever story the overprotective ego has, we will then respond with that fight or flight, no matter whether it is actually true or not. So again, you can see the correlation between, if we're starting to be aware of our thoughts, you can then see that we can just observe the ego as telling us the story, but then come back to what is actually true. And when you come back to the current moment, you'll actually realize that most of the things that it tells you is actually not really true right now. So it's really, really interesting to play around with the differences and to show the differences. I'll give you an example even yesterday of where my ego jumped up. So I'm sitting there at the beach, right? And I've had an awareness that a lot of the times, and people might call it being empathic, where they don't want to speak to people, they just want to be in their own space or whatever. And it's really interesting what I've been aware of from my own experiences is that's very much me. I like to kind of just stay to myself and just play in my own little bubble. And, you know, if I go out, I put my head down and walk along. And then I got the message from my soul voice saying, this isn't who you are. And I was like, that's really interesting. So I was then aware, and I've been aware of the fact that I then hide when I'm out in public so I don't have to talk to anyone. So I've been testing this out, and yesterday is an example when I'm sitting at the beach and this man walks past me with his surfboard and he looks at me and smiles. Usually I'd go like, you know, he does that. I'm not looking. Oh, did he just look at me? Oh. He does that. I would always just turn the other way, look down, and I went, that's the ego trying to protect me from some, I don't know, embarrassment or whatever story it wanted to create it, because I've been watching it for the last couple of weeks around the fact that it creates these thoughts around talking to people, which actually aren't even true. So I found that by even noticing the thought when someone, you know, looks at you or says something or whatever, and you notice the thought that you actually have, and then realize how stupid it actually is, like, what is the worst thing that can happen, right? I've actually had the best conversations with people who I would not normally have, because I've been like hiding because the ego says that don't talk to those people. So it's actually really fun. You watch, and if you can experience and experiment over the next, 24 hours, because we're going to jump in with some more tomorrow, just play around with this, because you watch how many times the ego jumps in and goes, don't do that, don't say that, don't do blah, 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 blah. Start to observe the thoughts, and they're just the egoic thoughts here to protect you. Now, I want to make sure that you also don't make the ego wrong or bad. It's just there to protect you. That's its job. Even making the ego wrong or bad is still the ego. So it's really important just to notice that it's just doing its job, and you're making a choice from being in survival to moving into growth and expansion. So now I'm finding when I'm going out now, I just want to talk to everyone. So this empath that couldn't talk to anyone and gets affected by so many people just wants to love everyone and talk to everyone. And that is who I naturally am. And that's who we all naturally are. We're not these machines that, don't want to love up everyone else and, share stories and talk to each other and everything else. We actually do want to do this. So and you start to know, again, this is what I'm talking about. It felt bad to not talk to people. It felt bad. So my feelings were saying that that's not who you are. And then I had to look at what thoughts were corresponding with what was going on, which was making me do that. If that was a good example. So that's one step that you can do. The next one, which I'll quickly go into, is it's a really interesting story where I've been observing these thoughts for a while, and this happened at the beginning of last year. I've been observing the thoughts for a while and being so interested in them, but there was one time when I had to do a group of psychic readings, which are very hard when you don't even know the people that you're doing them for, and you don't know if the right information's coming through or anything like that. So I remember as I'd finished doing them, I went to the toilet. And as I sat on the toilet, I got these following thoughts. You are hopeless. You have no idea what you're doing. You're not good enough. Everyone else is better than you, and you may as well quit. Now, what happened is I didn't recognize the thoughts when they happened. So I then started going, shit, I should actually maybe just go and get a job. And then I was just like going into another story. I should do this. And and I started feeling really bad. The feeling bad woke me up into going, crap, they're just thoughts. They're just thoughts. I actually don't, and when I could see them as thoughts, I knew that they're not true. They're absolutely not true. So I could look at them, and it's still interesting today that I can remember every single one of them. Like those 5 thoughts I could remember. And I looked at them and I went, they're not true. I don't believe that. So the thing is that as I'm sitting on the toilet and having that awareness, I then realized that they were stuck to me. They were really kind of sticking to me. And even though I had the awareness of them and can see them, and to see them happening, they kind of still were floating around me. I couldn't really do anything. But I'll share with you that when you have an awareness of a thought, which is a really bad thought, and you see it as happening, it's actually just so, like, you just take a deep breath and go, oh my God, it's like relief when you actually realize it's not you, it's just a thought. But with this, they were so bad that they're kind of just hanging around. I did have relief, but they were still kind of hanging around. And I just went, what do I do about this? And I received a phrase. And the phrase was, that's just the ego and I'm calling it out. And so I went, okay, so they're just the ego. Those thoughts are just the ego, and I'm calling it out. And then over time, I'd learned to take a couple of deep breaths, and all of a sudden they were all gone. So again, if you are aware of a thought happening and it kind of isn't shifting, you can then just call it out. And I'm not saying call it out as into it is bad or wrong. It's just calling it out as I see you. I'm seeing you. You are in the spotlight. You are not hiding anymore. I see you and I'm calling you out. Then take 3 deep breaths, and what happens is it instantly goes. So again, we're going to practice this. So anyone here on the call who wants to use some thoughts or feelings or experiences, I can't see all of you, so just type in the side who wants to, oh, here we go, I might see. So anyone want to put, so I can't see everyone as well. So if you want me to use you an example of any thoughts, any situations that you're stuck in or anything like that, where we can use it to see that it's the ego, kind of type in the box who it is. Natasha, do you want to? And it's only because I can see you and Brenda, so I will unmute you. Hello, my love.
Hello, how are you doing?
I'm very, very well. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
Oh, good. Now, what have you got for us?
Oh, I got my battery is low. Can you still see me?
Yes, yes.
I'm with my girlfriend right now, and
yes. Hello.
It's just she can't see, she can't hear. You know, she can't.
Okay.
Hear. So that's good. I can speak freely because she can't hear me and she doesn't understand English. So I'm lucky with that. I was just thinking about something because I've got this relationship which is going on really well. We like a really good team. We do a lot of things together and we're happy to be together. But she lives a bit far away, about 1.5 hours. And I haven't seen her like for 2 weeks. We don't see each other all the time. And I feel like recently I need a bit more spice in my life sometimes, you know. And I'm wondering if it's really bad or because I don't want to break. It's like am I good enough? Do I deserve this relationship, or is it something else?
Well, there's
You
lots
see
of
what I mean?
thoughts there.
Yeah.
So if you could see all of those as thoughts, they're just thoughts that are happening. They're not actually you. They're just thoughts that are happening. How do you feel then when you notice that?
But the thing is, I know that when somebody I'm attracted to, and I shouldn't be, maybe, you know.
So
You know what I mean?
again, like they're all thoughts that are happening.
The
When you
feeling
know,
is not really a thought. When you
there's
feel
always a
something for
thought
somebody.
connected to, there's always a thought connected to a feeling. So what is the feeling? And tell me what the thought is connected to the feeling.
It's exciting.
Yeah.
It's something that I shouldn't do, of course, or be, I don't know.
Yeah, they're all just thoughts. So you can decide what ones you want to adopt as true and which ones you are just the ego trying to protect you.
Because I'm wondering if I'm missing something, if I'm feeling something else for somebody else. Do I miss something in my relationship, or
Yep.
what
I
is it?
love this because that's also the ego questioning. So the questioning is also the ego. So the way the ego turns up is also questioning. So it'll actually make you doubt yourself as to what you believe is true or what you think is true. So you don't even know at the moment.
Hmm.
True?
Yeah.
You won't even know. So I want you to practice, and hopefully you can come in during the week. I want you to practice being aware of these thoughts. Write all the thoughts down and then just look at them. Now, as you look at them, you will receive the truth as to what
What do
is
you mean?
true.
What, everything I just said right now, that means I shouldn't do this, or I shouldn't feel
Yep,
this, or...
yep. All shoulds, have tos, they're all the ego. So write them all down. Every thought that you have, just write them down and go, well, they're just thoughts. What is true? And see what comes through. Because there's a lot there. There's a lot of thoughts there. But
I don't
usually,
know what's true.
yeah, even the I don't know is still the ego saying I don't know. What you find is that the more that you start to get used to having those thoughts and observing having those thoughts, you will always know. You will always have the truth. You will always know what to do because you're tuning into another consciousness, not the one that doesn't know. Because the one that doesn't know is that tunnel vision that you're born with that says, I don't know anything. So it's just practice. It does take practice. So what you've got to do is write down, and because you've got a lot, if you just had one thing, which I think Brenda's got one thing that I can use, but you've got a lot of things that take a little bit of time. So if you can play around with that and actually start to write down all of those and just start, that first step is just to go, well, they're just thoughts. And then I feel like once you actually have that, more will come through and you can just write those down. And then more will come through and you can just write those down until there's nothing. It'll keep creating more and more and more thoughts until there's nothing, and until you get to that reset point. And then you'll either have nothing or you will receive that soul voice coming through saying, well, that's, again, they're all stories. They're all, choices. They're all whatever it wants to tell you. But you just have to practice that because you haven't experienced that yet. So just try and experience it first off and just write down, because there's a lot of thoughts that you're having. Write them all down. Like, to be honest, I write them all down when I'm working on myself. I write them all down when I'm working with people, to be able to actually look at them. That gives you that space to be able to see what they are. You don't know what they are because they're just running around in your head at the moment. Does that feel true? So to give you some clarity, you need to write them down first off, and that's your first step. And then start to go, well, that's just a thought, that's just a thought. And I want you to say that. That's just a thought, that's just a thought, that's just a thought. If you get stuck with any of them, you can say, that's just the ego and I'm calling it out, and take 3 deep breaths. All of a sudden, that just won't feel true anymore. That I don't know what to do, or I'm confused, or I'm stuck, or whatever. And you'll find that you'll get so much clearer. But the answers, and this is where they say you get the answer from within you. This is exactly what it means, is that you will get the answer. And that's why I love doing this work, because I don't actually tell anyone anything. It all comes from them, but you've got to actually notice the difference between the egoic survival voice, which is telling stories about what it thinks, you know, just to try and protect you, to what is actually true. So, but usually when you are starting to do this work, you get nothing once you actually acknowledge the thoughts, because there's so much there. But once you do more of it, you'll actually start to get more of a voice coming through to tell you what is true for you. So just practice that and let us know how you go. Can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that'll be good. There's a lot there.
I'll try and do that.
I would love to do. I'd love to deal with them now, but there's so much there that you'll need to.
If we could just do one to see what would it look like.
Yep, good. Okay, give me one. But I think what happens is that when you give me one, then there's another one, and then there's another one, and then there's another one. Because that's what happened before.
Somebody else, and if you want, I don't know.
So you just bring up one, and I'll show you how it works. So just say one.
There's so many, I don't know which one to take.
See, I told you.
Can it start with the why? Why?
Yeah.
Why
okay.
do I think about somebody else?
Okay, so that's just a thought.
Yeah. Why would I be looking at somebody else when I'm with somebody who I love deeply already?
Yep. Okay, so that's just a thought.
So every time you ask something, you just say it's just a thought?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no answers to these things?
You will get the answers, because you're actually not giving me the answers now. So I know you actually haven't tuned into that part of you that has the answers.
I don't know.
You will know once you actually, once you go through them.
In my life, like what was missing?
That's another one. So you can see, so I want you, it's getting to know yourself. It's getting to know these thoughts, because they're always the thoughts that have been going on, which you may not be knowing that they're going on. Does that make sense? So it's like, so you've got the questions as to why, but then you've actually gone into, well, what is missing? So then you go into that, and then you'll actually find it's a beautiful experience of getting to know how you think, or how these thoughts are, where they're all coming from. And you'll find that you'll just really tune into these thoughts that have always been going on. And it's really beautiful to see them. Again, don't make them bad or wrong, because that's still the ego. They're just thoughts. And that's what I want you to do, is I want you to just keep looking at them as thoughts. So yeah, practice it. And I want to see how you go. I bet you by the end of this week, you will be clear as, what's clear? Clear as clear.
Yeah, as long as I don't see her, this woman. If I don't see her, that'll be fine.
That is also a thought. Keep taking notes. That's like me saying, I don't want to talk to that person because I don't even know why. You know what I mean? Like, why would I not talk to these random strangers that are walking past? There's obviously something that my ego has created as a story that means that I'm not safe if I talk to strangers. Maybe that's it. Maybe that's what I learned. But it's not actually me and how I live. Now, I know Brenda has to go. You said you recently had thought that I can't say that sorry, you can actually talk, Brenda. I'll unmute you. What did you say? I've recently had a thought that I can't say that.
That I felt, I guess, under threat.
Oh, good.
And in my head, I was like, oh, I just want to say this. But then something in me can't say that. And so I don't. And so I say what I want to say. And I feel like I'm not getting my point across, or I don't get a chance to get my point across, but I'm stopping myself doing that. And it's all based around, like, because, there's part of me that is aware, yes, because I've worked a little bit with you, and I've sort of, in my head, that's just a thought, but then it's sort of, I get caught back up in the whole frenzy of it all, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just, and I get my head going around, and trying to sort it out myself.
So go to the first thought. You can see how many. So what was the first thought?
I think the first thought is this situation is threatening or something.
Great. Okay. Because I've also been able to have experiences of those kind of thoughts. So if you could look at that thought as just a thought.
Yeah.
Do it now.
Yeah.
I'm not putting you on a spot or anything, but And it is, I will say, in calls, when someone's on the spot, it is hard to actually process. It's good to do it on your own. So if you have the thought that it's threatening and you know that that's just a thought, what do you know about that when you look at that as a thought?
Well, it's actually not threatening. Like, I'm not about to die.
Perfect. That's the soul voice, and that is the ego voice. Can you see the difference?
Yeah.
And how do you feel now?
Yeah, like, much better.
Who knew, right? 1 second.
I definitely will work on this and
practice it.
Natasha, just keep writing down the thoughts, because that's what I avoid do as well, writing it down. So.
Yeah, write them all down, because again, you can see them as thoughts, and then you can actually then start to really observe them. If you can try and be in observer mode for most of the day and just observe the thoughts, it's actually really fun. Like even, you know, Brenda, when you came on, you said, oh, you've had such a, you know, traumatic time or whatever. I'm like, well, it's only traumatic if I see it as traumatic. It's actually not. It's actually been so interesting. Yeah, because, and even when I was drowning, I was observing the thoughts, and then I realized that those thoughts don't actually help me survive. So I had two like life-threatening things happen in a week, which really allowed me, and there were two very different things. There was one of the I don't know what's going on, and creating the stories of, oh, I've got so much more to do, and blah, 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 blah. Those thoughts into, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. See, even in those situations, I could notice the thoughts, which is why they happened. Yeah. I could notice the thoughts and then actually realize that they're not helping me in these situations. And then looking at, we literally have to have a clear head to be able to deal with the situations. And
attachment.
Just be clear, be so clear. And the thing is that what we've always done is just had so much in there. Yeah. We can't do it. And so we just sit there, like I sit there staring at a wave that's just about to hit me going, crap, like, no, that doesn't work. And you just keep asking this question, does this work? Like, does this, you know, is this thought going to help me? Well, no, it's not. I mean, we don't want to make it bad or wrong. It's just a thought. Yeah. And once you recognize it's just a thought, it just changes it. Yeah. We're so lucky to know it. And if we're not aware of the thought that's happening, we will feel bad to show us we're having a thought that's creating a story or whatever. It's so interesting. Natasha, you're in for such a journey, writing down all of these thoughts. You will go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into yourself by doing this. It's so crazy.
I'm going to go, but thank you so much.
Thanks for joining. And Marianne, hello, my love. This is my mum, everyone. So nice to see you. I can't hear you though for some reason. Maybe I have to unmute you.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, there you go. Hey.
There we go. There you go. You look lovely. You look beautiful this morning, as always.
Oh, thank you. Do you want to ask anything?
No, I'm just
happy.
Sort of picking up a lot of this of what you're saying. That because my head goes. You know what my head's like. I constantly criticizing myself, but I'm starting to realise that it's not fact what I'm saying, but it's only taken me 70 years. Yeah, it's only taken a lifetime.
Well, you know what? We've had lots of lifetimes of actually doing this. So I actually think it's awesome that we're doing it now.
Exactly.
So awesome. So and isn't it great? Like
now we're on the path.
We are, and like that knowing that you have. You can see that even though the thought is telling you this, you know it's not true.
Yeah.
But
right.
I think where we mostly get stuck is that we actually think that the thought is true, and that's when we get stuck.
Yeah, you let it take over.
Yes. So practice this. I've got more to share tomorrow. So practice this, guys. I've unmuted you all if anyone wants to say anything. Practice just observing your thoughts. It's actually even hard to do that. just when you have a thought, look at it. Okay, that's just a thought, and keep saying that's just a thought. That's just a thought. That's just a thought. Now, that's if you don't have a piece of paper. But if you have a piece of paper near to you, write it down and just go, wow, and just let it all spill out. Like, it's like a big clearing for your head. It's very, very cool. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining me. It's so good to have you guys here. If you can, I am doing this every day for the next 3 days, so, and I'm going to share more and more. Also, in the group that we're in, you can comment or put some posts or anything like that about your experiences by doing this. And yeah, let's practice it. So it's really, really cool. Have fun. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.
Love
See you
you.
guys. Love
Bye.
you. Bye.
See you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.